Our fire and rescue services attend to over 1 million fires or false alarms each year, which cause almost 600 deaths and nearly 17,000 serious injuries. Over 40,000 fires are reported each year in commercial premises and public buildings. As a result, fire claims reach the staggering figure of £680 million, which equates to almost £2 million per day. It could be different. Consider that the cost savings of reducing fires by, say, 5% would be £50 million, and by 15%, £150 million. Add to this the savings in human costs and suffering, and we have more than enough reason for all of us to be vigilant and professional when it comes to our approach to fire safety. What we're going to do is look at the elements needed as employers and employees to ensure that we're performing our duty towards having essential fire safety in the workplace and for our work tasks. We're going to look at the nature of fire itself, as well as 6 areas in which we have to consider, comply with and implement essential fire safety. These are fire regulations, how they affect you and what you have to do to comply. Fire risk assessment, your first step in identifying potential danger and putting in place controls to minimise risk to people and property. Fire prevention, which is mainly your own fire risk management. Fire detection, for a swift response to a fire breaking out. Fire containment, we'll be looking at fire safety training and firefighting equipment. And fire escape, which includes raising the alarm and evacuation. But first, what is fire? Fire is a chemical reaction known as combustion. This occurs when fuel and oxygen are brought together with sufficient heat to cause ignition. This is known as the fire triangle. Wherever you are, you're likely to be 2/3 of the way to a possible fire. Take the paper in this bin, it's potential fuel. There's oxygen all around it, but it's unlikely to self-combust. Add sufficient heat, however, a naked flame like this, or maybe radiated heat or sparks, and the triangle is completed. You have fire. Now, this simplifies the fire triangle, but now that you're aware it takes 3 elements to make a fire start, you can begin to consider the dangers and controls relevant to your place of work. Bearing in mind the principles of the fire triangle, understanding how to extinguish fires becomes easier. If a fire is caused by a gas leak, by turning off the supply of gas, the fire will go out. And in this case, if pallets are stacked in an open, secure area instead of against a warehouse wall, then if a fire does start, it's only the pallets that'll burn. The fire won't spread because you're starving it of fuel. When it comes to removing heat, the most common method of extinction explains it all. Water has the greatest heat-absorbing properties of all liquids. Cooling by water will extinguish a fire by absorbing more heat than the fire is generating. And the removal or limitation of oxygen will extinguish a fire. You can do this by blanketing or smothering to restrict the flow of oxygen. Fuel, heat and oxygen. Take one away and the fire can't survive. At this point, it's worth taking a closer look at the first of our 6 essentials. In the past, fire regulations were based on over 100 pieces of legislation, the most important of these being the Fire Precautions Act 1971, which focused on measures to ensure that occupants could evacuate premises safely and was based on inspection and certification. And the Fire Precautions Workplace Regulations 1997, as amended 1999, which made employers responsible for the risk of and taking precautions for fire. However, the regulatory reform Fire Safety Order supersedes both of these to simplify, rationalise and consolidate existing legislation, providing a regime based upon risk assessment across all workplaces. One of the main points of the Fire Safety Order is that fire certificates are no longer required. The other points of the legislation are: each individual company is responsible for their own fire safety. The employer must conduct a fire risk assessment, regardless of the size of the risk, and this risk assessment must lead to eliminating or reducing risk. The employer responsible for fire risk assessment has full corporate liability. Fire safety equipment must be properly maintained and fully functioning. The risk assessment must be documented if 5 or more people are employed. So who is responsible for administering the fire safety order within a company? Well, it could be the employer in charge of the workplace, or the manager of the building or premises, or the occupier of premises, or the owner of premises. Landlords of property may have responsibility to fire safety, but it's likely that the main responsibility will rest with the employer. Whoever it is will be held accountable under the fire safety order. Firefighters have the authority to gain entry to inspect the premises and the fire risk assessment. The fire brigade has the authority to police the order and can do it on an ad hoc basis. They'll also be able to advise you on fire safety, but they can't carry out a fire risk assessment on your behalf. This should be done by a competent person appointed from within your company, or by a reputable fire safety contractor. But what of an employee's responsibilities? Well, these are quite straightforward. All employees have a duty under law to minimise the risk of fire and to reduce danger whenever they can. In this case, it's not just about moving something from danger, but using common sense and reporting anything that you feel may pose a threat of fire to the appointed fire control officer. Regulations require you to address fire safety signage, and as a guideline, employers must use safety signs wherever there is a risk to health and safety which cannot be controlled by other means. Safety signs must be of a specified type. All signs must contain a pictogram. Text-only signs are no longer acceptable. Signs must be properly maintained and adequately lit. Employers must ensure that signs are understood by employees, and any missing or incorrect signs must be replaced. The positioning of signs is very important, and your risk assessment should identify where your essential fire safety signs should be best positioned in your particular place of work. Let's move on to the second element of our essential fire safety. A fire risk assessment is a systematic look at the potential sources of fire, the danger that fire poses to those who use the workplace, and how you can minimise the risks. There are essentially 5 steps to a fire risk assessment, and these are: identify the hazards. This is where the fire triangle comes in handy. It will help you decide on sources of ignition, fuel and oxygen. Decide who could be harmed from fire and smoke. When you've done that, you'll have to decide how they will be warned and how they will escape in the event of a fire. Evaluate the risks by understanding your surroundings and how fire, smoke and toxic gases can spread. Also decide if your existing precautions are adequate or if more needs doing. Record findings and action taken. If you employ 5 or more employees, then you must record the significant findings of your risk assessment and note the people at risk. You then need to ensure that action is taken to reduce the risk and record the measures taken. Also, if you have 5 or more people working for you, then you must have a written emergency plan. And review and revise. The risk assessment must be reviewed regularly to make sure that the precautions taken are still working effectively. Your fire risk assessment should be reviewed following a change of work practice, a significant change in staff levels, after any structural or material change, any change in fire precautions in the premises, and also after a near miss or fire incident. The 5 steps are consistent to most approaches to fire risk assessment. What is not consistent is the different types of workplaces and work-related tasks. A fire risk assessment will invariably be unique to your company. That's why you should make a full tour of your company premises, even those little used outbuildings or offices. You should also assess the risk in hidden places. Your assessment should cover all parts of the company premises. When making a risk assessment under the Fire Safety Order, consideration must be given to property safety, job security of employees, business continuity, the safety of firefighters, and the local environment. Your assessment will have to consider any danger to fire service personnel if they have to attend an incident at your premises. Make sure you inform them of anything in your place of work that may cause an explosion, such as gas cylinders or highly inflammable materials. Inform them also about the access and escape routes and anything else that you think may be necessary for their safety. A fire started on your premises could affect the safety of adjacent buildings or roads, your neighbours and passers-by. You must also provide fire safety training and suitable prevention systems, including evacuation procedures if deemed necessary. Your risk assessment will have to consider all visitors, contractors, customers, passers-by, and in particular the risks to the disabled, including the hard of hearing. In the event of a fire, the main priority is making sure that everyone quickly reaches safety, and this must be reflected in your risk assessment. Fire risk assessment is crucial to monitoring, updating and improving the fire safety in your workplace. We've produced a comprehensive guide to fire risk assessment which covers each of the 5 steps in much more detail. It will help you know exactly what's needed when you come to do your own fire risk assessment. Your risk assessment is a major step forward to helping prevent fire. You may find you need to install equipment such as extinguishers, hoses, fire blankets or sprinkler systems. The firefighting equipment must be suitable to the risks you've identified, and you need enough of it in place for your employees to extinguish a fire in its early stages without exposing themselves to danger. The equipment must be suitable to the risks you've identified. Fire extinguishers should normally be located in conspicuous positions on escape routes and preferably near exit doors. They should be clearly visible and, if necessary, signage used to aid the location of firefighting equipment. It's likely that your staff will need training and instruction in the proper use of firefighting equipment. In fact, within a company, you may need to appoint fire wardens for each working area. A fire control manager will be the person responsible for overall fire safety in the workplace. He'll set up the emergency plan and implement the risk assessment. The fire wardens will be people who are trained to implement and facilitate the emergency plan in the event of a fire. They should be trained to use the portable firefighting equipment. The fire control manager and fire wardens are the people who will know the procedures to follow in the event of a fire and what precautions to take afterwards. They should be the people within the company who are assertive, permanently based on site and likely to stay with the organisation for a length of time. But don't think that all the responsibility lies with the fire control manager and fire wardens. It doesn't. All employees need to know what to do in the event of a fire. That's why it's important to have pre-planned procedures such as those you've recognised in your emergency plan. These procedures, such as fire evacuation drills, must be practised regularly. All employees and contractors have to be told about evacuation arrangements and shown the means of escape as soon as possible after arriving at the premises. Housekeeping and management of the controls you've put in place are crucial to fire prevention. It's usually when negligence takes place that fire hazards develop. This accumulation of rubbish is a potential fire hazard and is unnecessary. Fire brigades can inspect sites at any time. If they find that fire prevention measures are not working or are being ignored, then they have the power to prosecute and even close an operation down. If you have new buildings or are making alterations to existing premises, you must follow and implement the fire prevention controls advised within the building regulations. These will be particular to your premises and the type of work you do, and they will all help towards fire prevention. Reducing the potential of fire is essential and should be identified in your risk assessment. Understanding the geography of your building and workplace is essential for effective fire detection. Depending on your premises, the type of building you occupy, your risk assessment should take into account how a fire may spread and how people might be put at risk. Understanding the characteristics of how most fires develop will enable you to put into place detection systems that will help avoid a potential disaster. A fire outdoors will react and work differently to a fire in an enclosed space. If you experience a fire outdoors, you can move away from it to reduce the risk. But indoors, a fire is enclosed and the smoke from the fire rises to the top of the building. The smoke will have nowhere else to go and will form a dense cloud that will get thicker and thicker. The smoke will then try to get through any gaps or spaces in the building, putting other areas or escape routes at risk. The heat from the fire also gets trapped in the enclosed building, and this increases the temperature and the danger. Smoke and heat will jeopardise anybody not in direct contact with a fire. In fact, smoke inhalation is the biggest killer when it comes to death involving fires. But whatever the risk, you want any instance of fire to be detected as early as possible so that it can be contained quickly and give enough time for people to evacuate the building safely. An automatic fire detection and alarm system provides early warning of a possible emergency situation. This system allows you to identify where a fire starts from a central monitoring point that helps you to decide on the appropriate way to deal with the fire. It will allow you to facilitate safe and swift evacuation. The system can also call the emergency services automatically. It's particularly useful for detection in areas that are unoccupied or not used on a regular basis. Smoke and heat detectors should be placed in areas that are deemed most at risk, as well as strategic areas to give you overall coverage for your premises. Gas detection devices will be useful particularly where gas or solid fuels are used. Emergency lighting could be activated in case of a fire and give notification of a fire in that particular area.